Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, it's the final season of our beloved haunted house sitcom Ghosts, and then we'll be talking about the new movie Foe, a ponderous sci-fi film starring Saoirse Ronan and Paul Mescal. But before we get to those, Alistair, what else have you done?
Well, I've been to the cinema to see another film that's been talked about a lot recently, which is The Killers of Flower Moon.
Oh, yes.
Yes, new film directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro. Yeah, this film's significant for several reasons, partly because a new Scorsese film is always significant, big name director. But yeah, this is the first time he's worked with both of his two acting muses over the years. Yeah, Robert De Niro, mainly his main lead man for the first bit of his career, and Leonardo DiCaprio, who is the lead man in the later part of Scorsese's career. So yeah, this is them both together acting in a period drama about a true event, I believe, when this group of Native Americans who discovered oil on their land, and the violence and corruption that's ensued as various powerful people try to take this money away from them as much as possible. It's about 3.5 hours long.
Hey.
So it's a pretty long film, yeah. Obviously, it will be coming, I think, to Apple Films soon, so you might be able to watch it there and take breaks. I did go to the cinema to see this, and not only is it a long film, it's quite slow paced. I don't sort of mean that as a criticism, but in the context of a 3.5 hour film, that can be seen as a criticism. It certainly doesn't zip by in the way that Avengers Endgame did and did not feel its 3 hour plus length. But it does this real slow build, powerful builds, and the characters' relationships builds up over time. There's a lot of nuance brought in. There's a lot of detail and building up these relationships. This town where all the people live and kind of all the various characters in it, all the different nasty murders and stuff that take place over the course of the film. So, and it really builds to a very powerful climax. Yeah, it kind of uses that 3 hour length very well, and it uses the slow pace of the film to build tension and kind of create this kind of simmering intensity. But at the same time, there was a point when I feel I've been sat here for quite a while. It feels like a long time. And this film shows absolutely no sign of drawing to a conclusion. And I sort of realised I've probably been here about 2 hours, and there's an hour and a half to go, which is the length of a normal film. But overall, I would say it's good, especially if you're a Scorsese fan.
This is an Apple TV thing, isn't it?
Yes, I believe it is, yeah.
It sounds like something I'm gonna end up watching, if I watch it at all, over the course of 2, if not 3 sittings.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's probably someone on the internet has provided a chart of at what point you can break it up into chunks. I remember Scorsese's previous 3 hour plus film, The Irishman, for Netflix. I saw some graphics circulating saying how to watch The Irishman as a miniseries, and then it had these are the kind of points you stop, the kind of time signatures you stop at in order to break it into sort of dramatic chunks that kind of fit neatly together. So yeah, you could probably watch this in several chunks if you want to.
Yeah, that seems like what's going to happen. Okay, but you'd say it's a worthwhile endeavour despite its punishing length.
I did enjoy it, yeah. I thought the performances were really, really good. Some absolutely great acting. Really detailed characters. There's a lot of emotional complexity to it. Yeah, there's a lot of betrayals, emotional and otherwise, people caught in binds when they've got, between multiple loyalties. So yeah, you get a real sense of, like I say, this whole town that it's set in is kind of built up. It makes it feel like a real place. And also the core family at the heart of the story, you really get the sense of who they are as people, and that they're, real people. So it uses the length well.
Okay. You're good. I may get past my hatred of long films to watch. I guess we are getting towards Oscar film season, aren't we?
Yeah, I get the feeling this might be one that's gets a lot of Oscar nods, a lot of Oscar buzz. That said, we have previous form for making predictions about Scorsese films and Oscars, namely Silence, that didn't turn out great in terms of our projections. So I'm a little hesitant to say again that this film's going to get loads of nominations, but it's a great film, epically directed. It's got strong performances. It's kind of a sort of Hollywood friendly film. It's not as out and out weird as, say, The Zone of Interest. So it's the sort of thing I think that might do well at the Oscars, or at least in nominations.
Yeah, and I'm not as down with the film scene as you, so I don't really have any sense of what we're expecting to win Oscars this year. I know there's a new David Fincher film out.
Yeah, that's another possibility. There's always some dark horses that come along. We're definitely in Oscar season right now, so these are the films that are being deployed. In the hope that they win big. There's Napoleon, I suppose, is another one that might do very well. Again, historical epic.
I'm not sure I knew that was happening. Who's doing that?
So it's Ridley Scott has directed a
Of
biopic
course
of
it is. Okay.
Napoleon starring Joaquin Phoenix. The trailer looks really, really good. So yeah, again, there'll be another probably epic film with a huge central performance in it. Yeah,
But it does sound like the sort of thing that might win Oscars as long as it isn't, wank.
yeah, exactly. You've got to wait to see when it comes out. But the trailers look good. So yeah, that's one of the big films I'm excited about in the next few weeks. Yeah, the race is starting to emerge who the runners are, but still, the nominees won't be till late January, so there's still time for surprises.
And sadly, June been removed from contention.
At least for this year.
Yeah.
I guess next year's Oscars, so maybe it'll be in the 2025 Oscars. Who knows?
Yeah, cool. I'm glad to see the most pretentious time of the year has started.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep you posted on the runners and riders for the Oscars this year. First out of the gate, Killers of Flower Moon. But that's what I've been up to recently. So, Nick, what have you been up to?
I have been watching the final season of Sex Education on Netflix, the erotic teen comedy about a kid who starts a underground sex therapy clinic at his school, having learnt valuable lessons from his sex therapist mother, played by Gillian Anderson. And yes, at this point, we're in the fourth and final season. At the end of the last year, the kids managed to get their school shut down, and now for one final season, they're going to a local college where they discover that instead of the uptight repression of their school, they're now in a sort of open, progressive, or at least openly performatively progressive environment where they have to deal with different kinds of challenges. Otis discovers there's already a sex clinic on campus and there doesn't really seem to be any need for him. Eric, his friend, played by breakout star Shuti Gatwa, meets a bunch of other queer people of colour and so on, other people who he has more in common with than perhaps his awkward white straight friend Otis. And yeah, the characters all move on to different things and they start to drift into adulthood. Yeah, it's a theoretically not a bad idea for the final season of Sex Education, and there's some good moments, I guess. The characters all do get a send-off. It does feel like an ending. It does conclude the story. We're not doing a sort of the story is finished, yet they're still going thing. There's clearly more to do and they do it. But sadly this doesn't quite work for me. I don't know, it doesn't feel very dramatic or imperative or fun. They don't carry on being funny, which is the main purpose to me of this show. Funny with a hint of emotion, and they don't really add in much excitement or drama either. There's a bit of sort of good character emotion, but the actual plot just sort of noodles along. The new characters they introduce, because they've gone to this new setting, there's quite a lot of new characters, and most of them are quite thinly sketched, which I guess makes sense in a way, because it's their final season, and they've got to, wrap up their already quite large existing cast. But they seem to have gone halfway on this by bringing in a load of new people, giving them a sort of token amount of time just to establish they exist, but not doing that good a job of it. So yeah, there are some storylines that do work, but they're mostly sort of subplot stuff. There's a nice romance story with the characters Amy and Isaac, which is quite sweet. Eric's storyline it's an all-right idea for a storyline, and Shuti Gatwa is so charismatic that it's hard to, hate it, but it doesn't entirely land for me. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag, Sex Education Season 4, a bit of an awkward final season. Obviously you never know with Netflix whether they just suddenly cancel them with no warning, but it does feel like they're going towards an ending the whole time. It just doesn't feel like they quite nail it, sadly.
It's unfortunate to say that there's a lack of humour and drama. It seems to be like the kind of central pillars of most shows, especially this one.
Well, yeah, it was a sort of, a bawdy comedy drama, I guess, and there's knowing silliness and sort of humorous, open vibe towards sex. It's still kind of there, but seemingly not as much. Some of the sex education in Sex Education maybe seems a bit preachier rather than funny. As I say, there's still a few occasional good character emotion bits, especially as we get into the actual final 2 or 3 episodes. But, yeah, alas, plot not really there. Bit of a disappointment.
It sounds like I don't want to be the sort of reviewer that just says the show I would have written if I was in charge, and also I've not seen this show, but it does sound like they bizarrely went for a sort of de-escalation in the final season. I mean, I get the kind of plot trajectory of the school's been shut down, the characters are sent to a new school, that creates new stakes. But it sounds like they went to a school with less possibilities for drama. The obvious comparison, which came to mind when you were talking, is the seasons of Orange is the New Black, when they shut down their minimum security prison and they all get sent to a maximum security prison, which obviously really ups the drama because now they're in a really serious prison with genuinely dangerous people. So I guess if I was writing this show, rather than sending them on to a progressive, comprehensive, would it be if they got sent to like an incredibly rough, dangerous school?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, they've clearly got some ideas, like there's them tackling sort of the idea of toxic positivity, the Otis having to deal with not being the only sex therapist, but it's, yeah, as you say, it's not very dramatic, and yeah, they don't really have time to do that much with it. It does kind of feel like they might have been better off just stretching out the original setting for one more year, to be honest.
Oh well.
And just having it end in a more natural way. I think it had to end one way or another. Partly it does, to be honest, based on the way it just kind of sputters out. It feels like they're a bit out of ideas. And partly the characters are reaching the point, well, the actors are reaching the point where playing teenagers is starting to get a bit ridiculous.
Yeah, that is always the problem with any teen-based thing, especially if you cast people in their 20s, that some people kind of age quite dramatically in their 20s, and by the mid-20s very much look like adults, no way passing as teens.
Yeah, some of them, like the lead character Otis is played by Asa Butterfield, who does have quite a baby face and does more or less pull it off. Although some of the actors like Ncuti Gatwa do clearly look like they're pushing 30 when they're filming this.
Yeah, there's shows like Glee, even really the In-Betweeners by the end, they looked pretty grown up.
Yeah, obviously, tis the natural passing of time. You can't really do much about it unless you want to use some magical plot twist to transition your show into animation. But yeah, it is another reason why shows like this kind of have a shelf life unless you want to decide you're committed to it long term and just jump them into adulthood. Like Buffy pretty much had 1 year when they were going to university. Then basically they just sort of went from being, I think they're meant to be 18 to, I think they're like 20 something or something overnight.
Yeah, that works. I always wondered if this is the fate that awaits Yellow Jackets when they get to season 4 and there's all these women clearly look like they're in their mid-20s, not sort of 16, 17, 18.
Yeah, no, I don't know whether they're just going to recast the teen versions or if they're just going to hope we roll with it. It depends how long it takes them to finish Yellow Jackets. I guess all the strikes that are going on won't help with that.
Yes, the old strikes. The shadow that hangs over everything.
But yes, in terms of this show, it's an okay ending, I guess, but it's not a particularly enthralling bit of television, sadly. Which is a shame, as the first 3 seasons of Sex Education were all pretty good, I think.
So to someone like me who's not watched the show, would you recommend watch the first 3 seasons and leave it at that?
As I say, it doesn't. Season 3 isn't an ending, really. It does leave a lot of things unfinished. There is business to be done in the 4th season to actually finish the show, and it is done. They are aware of what they need to do. They just don't do a particularly good job of it a lot of the time. So yeah, I don't know. It'd be hard to say. If you just don't watch the 4th season, you will just basically be leaving on a cliffhanger with various things unfinished. So it's up to you, people of the world.
Next up, this episode, we will be discussing the 5th and final season of Ghosts, the sitcom from the makers of Horrible History. Following the closure of the guest house, Alison finds out that she is pregnant, which means her and her husband Mike need a new source of income from their haunted estate. We've seen the complete season of this on the BBC. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, this is just good, isn't it? Having just complained a bit about the final season of Sex Education, I thought this works pretty well. It also doesn't really seek to create massive, towering, dramatic stakes, but crucially, the show has never really been about that, and you don't really have any sense they're trying to. The Ghosts has always been a sitcom that is mostly as concerned with being kind of silly and funny. It has emotion, but doesn't necessarily have drama. So you occasionally get a sort of poignant moment with a character, but there's very little, oh my god, they're gonna die. Some of them are already dead, which really
so
cuts that off with the legs, yeah. But yeah, it's Ghosts. It goes out doing what it's always done, being just good, character-driven, fun comedy. There's a lot of highlights. There's a ridiculous episode with Mike trying to speak French, which is just funny in a stupid way, which is something the show does very well. Another one with Alison playing pranks on ghosts. Another one with Mike getting stuck in a safe with the neighbour. It's all very good. There was a tiny part of me that was going in thinking, is there going to be some sort of massive existential drama storyline? But that's not really what Ghost has ever done, so I can't really say it's a disappointment or that they defrauded me by not doing that. Ghosts went out being ghosts in a good way.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly build to a big dramatic conclusion, although there is some drama. It's in the final episode when they dig up something from the first episode, a key plot moment which I forgot had not actually been addressed, and close the loop on that, which is basically the story about how Alison got to be able to see the ghosts in the first place. And that was creates quite a nice dramatic moment. Beyond that, this is very much the sitcom when you get your sort of, King of the Hill kind of vibes, in that you get some silly characters in some silly situations bouncing off each other. And at the end, it always works out well. And you usually have a nice kind of warm feeling of togetherness and warmth at the end of an episode, which leaves you in a nice, pleasant mood and usually wanting to watch another episode. Overall, I thought this season was pretty good. I thought maybe the density of jokes wasn't quite at the level it was in maybe some of the previous seasons, the third and fourth season especially. They felt very much like it was just a complete steam train of just kind of set up, payoff, like kind of everything was just building towards either setting up a joke or paying one off, kind of like, great sitcoms, 40 Towers, Blackadder, things like that. This one's still very, very funny. Maybe not quite as high on the joke density, but still funny and good.
Yeah, I think there was a sort of double finale at the end. I think the penultimate episode was kind of the ghost finale, and then the final episode was kind of the human finale, if that makes any sense. The penultimate episode where one of the ghosts has a sort of a sudden realization or some sort of mathematical equation moment where he realizes that one of the ghosts is going to pass on, or
as they call it, being sucked off.
Yeah. I don't know if you've watched the American version, but they get a lot of mileage out of that joke in the American version. Some might say too much. They seem really happy to have an excuse to say, get sucked off on American television. So yeah, there's a rumour that someone's going to get sucked off. And yeah, I can see why they like it. It's fun. And as a result, they spend the entire episode, all of them, I don't know, worrying about or thinking about how they feel about this being, the end. And it does provide a bit of light drama, a genuine sort of big emotional moment for the ghosts. And then the humans get their sort of finale in the last episode where, as you say, we tackle both what's going to happen to them in terms of their future finances and the closed loop, which I also didn't actually see coming or had forgotten about, I guess, of what exactly happened to Alison in the first episode. So yeah, I think there's a good sort of a nice fringe of finality there. I think, I don't know, Ghosts may be headed for the British sitcom afterlife of occasional specials.
Yeah, I believe there is a Christmas special, which I suppose might be a more definitive wrap-up, although, as Doctor Who has shown, don't try to resolve major plot things for your Christmas special. Just tell a nice Christmas story, which is what they did for the Christmas last year. That was genuinely devastating.
Well, I mean, the lead character is pregnant, so I'm guessing it might be a Christmas special revolving around the birth of a child, which is, a nice, easy one to do.
Yeah, that is a very good point, yeah. I'm glad that they sort of wrapped it up at this point, because, if there was a slowing down of momentum, I felt that, this show wouldn't have benefited from, another 2 or 3 seasons. I mean, Peep Show is the obvious example. If they stopped Peep Show at season 5, again, one of the all-time great sitcoms, because, those are 5 really, really solid seasons. Again, maybe 3 and 4 are the best. But I'm glad the fact that Ghosts saw the need to quit while they're ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't many TV shows as a whole, to be honest, that massively benefit from trying to continue beyond season 5. Doctor Who maybe gets a pass due to its ability to regenerate itself.
I mean,
so to speak.
On some levels, each Doctor is kind of a show in its own right.
But when it's a more conventional standalone show with a set cast in a set location, often, once you've done 5 or 6 years of it, you've probably rinsed it.
Yeah. And there's still so many great bits in this, so many funny bits and sweet bits. Yeah, and they resolved outstanding plot bits. I think there were 2 ghosts you weren't aware of how they died. They were both addressed.
Yeah, both of them quite tragic, both of them quite sad in their own way.
Yeah. I like the fact that you finally find out the captain's name. It's James, which is that was a nice little reveal, because he's always just been the captain.
Yeah, and the main human characters, played by Charlotte Ritchie and Keel Smith-Bino, both continue to get some good moments. They get the arguably slightly less fun, sort of thankless regular human roles, but they still make them sing just by being good and charismatic and funny.
Yeah, I mean, the plot line of Alison being pregnant, they're a couple, they're having their first baby. It's familiar sitcom territory. But they managed to A, make some good humour out of it, and B, it gives the characters some new progression, somewhere new to go. They're injecting some quite mild, I suppose, dramatic stakes into the season. But it makes it feel like they're not just treading water, it's the same characters in the same scenario again. Especially as the ghosts can't really change because their nature as they are static.
Yeah, it gives them something new to react to while still being in character. I mean, I've been watching the most recent season of Lower Decks lately, the Star Trek sitcom show, and that's had the plot move of them becoming junior lieutenants rather than ensigns, which is quite a small change in the status quo all told, but does give them, something new to do.
Yeah, you need to keep injecting some kind of new energy into your show to keep it going and going. Like King of the Hill's one of the bizarre ones that it just really focuses on just a few characters and doesn't really change the dynamic that much. There's a few things, like Leanne having a baby and stuff. Simpsons obviously does it by always introducing new characters, which is by the time it gets to season 8, there's a cast of thousands and thousands of characters. By now it must be God knows how big. Because, yeah, whenever they need something new, they bring in a new character. But again, I like that fact that Ghosts, again, probably I think the best comparison is King of the Hill, because similar to King of the Hill, it really always focuses on the same few characters in the same location. They don't do like, oh, let's bring in a new character to shake up the dynamic or anything like that.
Yeah, it was interesting to me that they got so much out of, just this small group of characters mostly just hanging around in this location. Like, occasionally, obviously, there's a visitor or something, or new people or things coming into the environment.
Yeah, such as the French woman that you mentioned before, which does inject, again, I can see why, it works, say, the Simpsons approach, bring in a new character, everyone has to respond to that character, especially that character has a thing, such as they don't speak English, so everyone's trying to speak French to varying degrees of success.
Well, yeah, but it's a very sort of guest star type thing. It's not like they're trying to introduce them as a major new character in the series for the most part. It's just someone who's coming in to give them something to bounce off for this one episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other difference with the American version, I think, well, there were a few, but one of them is that the American version seems a bit more interested in the wider world of ghosts. Like, what does it mean for Alison's wider life, but she can now see the undead? What happens when she goes to the bank? What happens when she goes to a restaurant? What happens when she does anything? Whereas this show really isn't that interested in that.
Yeah, and they ditched, the sort of thing from the first episode, which is there's ghosts everywhere. So, there's an episode when they go out on the town on this, which is, again, very much addressing the familiar sitcom territory of some young people are going to have a baby. They're concerned about they're not going to be fun anymore, so they try and go out and have some fun. But yeah, there's no ghosts in that wine bar that they go to, or wherever it is.
Yeah, if this was the American version, they would definitely have met an undead party ghost in that wine bar.
Yeah.
That is what happens in every episode of that show. If they leave the house, they're going to meet a location-specific ghost.
Yeah, but again, I like the fact that they always loop it back to the same situation, same characters and stuff. I mean, it helps that there's, 8 ghosts? So that's quite a big cast. Obviously they can pair them up in different ways. So and there's various combinations. So in the final episode, what if, 2 of the characters fancied the same woman on the TV? In the one when we find out Robin speaks French, he realizes he learns it from the wife of one of the other ghosts. So they can pair them up in different things, different combinations. So the large cast keeps it going. And the fact they all work well together. I don't know if they are a comedy troupe, so to say. I mean, it's the Horrible Histories people. I don't know how long they've been working together as a unit, but certainly they kind of gel very well and bounce off each other.
Yeah, I think they are some sort of combined troupe. Well, they voted out one of them, didn't they, in series 3 or 4?
Series 4, Mary
gets sucked off.
Gets sucked off, yes.
And I have no idea if that was we should probably have someone move on decision, or if the actress wanted to leave. But either way, it was a good episode, and it was nice to see that actually happened naturally to one of the major characters on one occasion.
Yeah.
Part of me was surprised they didn't have it happen to anyone in the final season, but I guess no one wanted to leave.
Yeah, I mean, they were sort of building up to that.
But then again, I mean, maybe that's the obvious thing to do, and therefore they felt the need to subvert it.
Yeah, which is good. Keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, keeps everyone on the show for the future specials. But yeah, no, this is good. I think this and Derry Girls are probably going to be the 2 British sitcoms that stand out from the last 5-10 years. Certainly 5 years. 10 years might be pushing it.
Yeah, they're definitely the sitcoms of the modern age. They're, I think, entered into the annals of sitcom history, British sitcom history, where, like I say, I would put both Derry Girls and Ghosts up there, with the greats. Blackadder, 40 Towers, Young Ones, Father Ted, and I don't use those words lightly. All shows that are, devastatingly funny. But these, shows, Ghost definitely, I'd describe it devastatingly funny. It's a really good sitcom. Stick with it, watch it if you like sitcoms.
Well, yeah, and it's funny in a very sort of likeable way as well. Like, there's not the edge of sort of darkness or depression that a lot of comedy goes to, which you can sometimes, if you're overly cynical, and God knows I've been guilty of this in my time, feel like you have to go to that edge of grimness to be truly hilarious or something. But the fact that Ghosts manages to be both an incredibly good sitcom and not, and an incredibly good sitcom that's arguably on some level about death, and yet not turn to constant morbid bleakness is, if anything, all the more impressive.
Yeah, they balance it out well. Similar to The Good Place, so it's possibly a bit grimmer, yeah. And then there's some generally sad bits about the tragedy, the loss of life, and unfulfilled lives that these characters led. Especially, I thought the moment when the captain died was very, very sad. Which this season, Kitty's death also, again, when she's sort of reconciled with her sister before she dies, it's quite sad. So I think as you said earlier on, the show can do genuinely moving when it wants to, as well as genuinely funny.
Yeah, it always has that. I think had 1 or 2 sort of emotional moments per season, and continue that here. Good work, Ghosts. Rest in peace.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing Foe, starring Saoirse Ronan and Paul Mescal. In the future, when the environment has collapsed and people are migrating to space, Junior, played by Paul Mescal, is chosen to leave his remote farm and go up to space, leaving his wife, Henrietta, played by Saoirse Ronan, behind. While he is away, he's replaced by a machine replica of himself that lives with his wife in their home. We saw this film recently. Nick, what do you think of it?
When we covered The Creator a few weeks ago, I remarked that it seemed like it wanted to be a certain kind of sort of thoughtful, emotionally resonant sci-fi and ultimately fell short. And Foe has a similar problem, I think. It maybe doesn't fall quite as far short as The Creator did, but still, it's definitely going for something and not quite hitting it. It's going for this sort of internal, ponderous, sort of psychological thriller vibe where it's focusing very heavily on the lead character's relationship, the sort of Henrietta and Junior characters in this house dealing with their relationship in the shadow of this news that he's going to have to go to space. And yeah, it's definitely trying to really get under the skin of this. There's a lot of sort of theatrical speeches and characters delivering sort of ambiguous metaphors. It's interesting, and it's one of these things which is mildly frustrating because if it had worked, I'd probably love it if I was truly, invested in these characters and hanging on every psychological twist. But unfortunately, I didn't quite get there. It didn't quite connect for me. I found myself finding a lot of the characterization and stuff sort of going on a bit and repeating itself, and then there's a big twist towards the end, which I don't know if I'm planning on spoiling. I'm not going to spoil it yet, which is kind of clever in I see what you've done there way, but didn't really change my opinion of the film. It just makes it all seem a bit Black Mirror. So yeah, I don't know. To me, this is, I would say, interesting failure, but part of me feels it also isn't that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a sort of very specific sort of tone in that it's going for this sort of bleak relationship drama in that they live in a house in the middle of nowhere, everything's kind of dead and dying around them. There's lots of beautiful shots of just like arid wastelands. Yeah, it's supposed to be set in the Midwest, but I noticed from the credits they filmed it in like Australia, so I don't know if they found a more bleaker wasteland to represent the Midwest than the actual Midwest. And also they've kind of, there's this sci-fi element to it. And I like the fact that there's the sort of breaking down of genres is going on, which is the thing we see across books as well as like films and TV, that like this is mainly a relationship drama about this couple who live together and their sort of the difficulties of their marriage. And it's interesting that modern audiences are open-minded enough to have both together in the same film. Definitely in the past, I feel that certainly there would be industry perspective that people either want a powerful relationship drama or they want a sci-fi film. They don't want both at the same time, which is what this is.
Yeah, I don't think the problem with this film is the lack of an interesting premise, for sure. I think it's got a few interesting ideas in it. I think was originally a novel, isn't it? It's an adaptation of a novel.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's one of those things when like the novel takes you even more like inside the characters' heads and their relationship drama, so you get more of that.
Yeah, I can see this working as a novel. I think there's something about it that calls out to be, if anything, even more internal than they can manage here. I mean, I guess it's one of these films that is kind of theatrical in a way, in that there's a lot of speeches, there's a lot of two-handers in the same setting. Yeah, it sort of feels like it's trying to build quite heavily on their relationships. There's also their relationship with Terence, the third character in the film. Yeah, the only other major character. I think possibly even the only other named character, who sort of moves in with them under the pretense of, well, the excuse of running tests on the husband's Junior before he goes to space. And yeah, again, there's this sort of the psychological thriller aspect, the idea of this third person sneaking into their relationship and asking these needling questions on the grounds of science. I can see how it's sort of meant to work. Again, there's a lot of stuff in Foe where I sort of, yeah, okay, I see what you're doing. I see how this could work as an idea. But then I'm actually watching it and just kind of finding it a bit hard to care. I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, there's something quite threatening about this guy who sort of like comes out of nowhere, insinuates his way into your home, and then pushes them around and tests their relationship, behaves in a very strange, certainly unprofessional way. And there's something quite sinister about it. But yeah, I never felt the sort of, I don't know, the sort of true awful intensity of it.
I don't really feel like it's ever like built in the way that that's necessary. Like, it doesn't really feel like I get the sense of him turning up and maybe seeming benign at first and then maybe sort of worming his way under their skin. He's just kind of there, almost between scenes. He just sort of appears. He sort of mentions he's going to move in, and then like 30 seconds later it's like he's been there for months. And he's already being quite sinister and quite sort of underhanded and asking questions that are obviously intended to kind of undermine them.
Yeah, a film that did this better, although it is a flawed film, and I think we gave it a bit of a negative review, is the film Mother, or possibly Mother, to pronounce the exclamation mark. But at least that did a good job of, there's a couple, they live in this little isolated house, and then people start insinuating their way into the house, and it gets worse and worse and worse, till it gets quite horrific. That kind of builds quite naturally from like, a couple come round and then there's some, more people, and it kind of goes from normal to abnormal to terrifying in a way that you kind of follow. Whereas this film, we don't really get the sense of like normality. I mean, it's sort of set in a kind of bleak, dead world, but then it's just basically, this guy shows up and then things are weird from that point onwards.
Yeah, and there's some nice sort of cutaways to the bleak dead world and sort of implications about what kind of place they now live in.
Yeah, it's beautifully shot, definitely. Yeah, and it's an interesting world. Like, it has a message about how kind of the whole world has died. We've not done the work of like rebuilding the natural environment or restraining human avarice, and the world is dying, and now we're going to space to be serfs in a big tech company's giant space station. And it's interesting that it's built by a company, but the guy is pretty much conscripted to go, and he's sort of pretty much threatened that if he doesn't go, there'll be consequences, to work for a company that he has no connection to. It's quite sort of dystopian, it's quite sinister, it's quite bleak. They've got all these things, and I kind of like the fact that they're sort of below the surface. They're part of the background of the story. Like, a story set during the Napoleonic Wars in, a country house would have the wider conflict and stuff as the backdrop that's driving the relationships. But I don't know, at the same time, I like the fact they didn't have heavy-handed speeches. As you know, since the world collapsed and the corporations took over the government, it doesn't have any of that. But at the same time, it kind of felt like I wanted to know more about the world and dive into that more, and have maybe just not the film just be the characters' relationships.
Yeah, I think possibly the lack of wider context, if anything, when the real world finally intrudes quite hard into their lives in the twist towards the end, which we're still not spoiling. And it always comes out of nowhere in a weird way, even though they have done the necessary setup. And the ending, and there's an ending, just sort of, I guess, another twist at the end, which I think is, again, a nice idea, and that bit's actually done kind of well. If anything, the last few minutes of the film after the twist, for reasons related to the twist, are almost a different film.
Yeah.
And I was watching that and thinking, okay, this could be good in itself, but I don't really feel like I've really been following this.
Yeah.
That has quite a neat, well-executed ending. I just didn't feel like I was entirely invested in it. It's a very jerky film.
Yeah, sort of a bit all over the place with that. It's built around the central performances. Yes, we say Saoirse Ronan, Paul Mescal, good actors, very talented. And I thought there's something about the relationship between them. It's kind of both good and bad, in that I wasn't kind of basically really invested in this couple, and like I wanted them to come through this, and kind of succeed or whatever, and didn't have that emotional stakes. But at the same time, I thought it's quite an interesting portrayal of a relationship that's quite difficult. They're not like totally besotted in love with each other, but and he's quite a difficult person. He's quite controlling, and has very strong mood swings. He can be quite aggressive. There's some bits when she feels like she looks kind of terrified of him. Some bits when they're clearly like really in love, and it kind of shows like a complex relationship. There's lots of stuff going on here. Their lives are bound up together. It's not entirely healthy, but it's not a horrible dysfunctional relationship. There's lots of detail there which are quite nice, but it didn't lead me to being like fully like invested in the characters and their drama.
Yeah, they are both good actors doing decent work. Does the chemistry not quite land? I'm not quite sure. There's definitely something about it that made it quite hard to fully invest in, because as you say, it's an interesting portrayal in that it doesn't go all the way to red flag, this is obviously a massively toxic relationship, run woman. But there's obviously some tension in it, but it's not, total undercurrents of misery all the time. There's some nuance there, or there's certainly nuance in the writing.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like a Tyrannosaur or Kneel by Mouth sort of horrible films about people being horrible to each other. And the plot arc is not her realizing that her husband is controlling and abusive and she needs to like escape him, which I thought where it might go, but it's not, because you think that's the dynamic at first, but then over time you discover, how much they love each other and how much they are bound up together, even though their relationship is possibly not a healthy one and they're both unhappy in various ways. But there's lots about that in the film, which is why I say it's an interesting mixture of genres, and that it is really a relationship film, about this marriage and how it's tested by this third person who comes into it. But again, the premises are making replicants, going to space, build, environmental collapse, not the sort of thing you normally expect. It's definitely not the sort of thing you see in a film like Tyrannosaur or Kneel by Mouth.
Yeah, as you say, it's interesting to see them combining these genres of the sort of domestic psychological thriller and sci-fi, which I imagine has been done before, but it's nonetheless, it's a valiant attempt, and it's something a little different, and I can see why this might have got some buzz in the trailers, this sort of premise, good actors in it. But the buzz, as I think you were saying the other day, seems to kind of stop when the film actually came out and people actually saw it, which is perhaps a sign that the film doesn't entirely work.
Yeah, there was a lot of interest online, in sort of film fan circles about this film. Good cast, interesting premise. The trailer came out and people were like, ooh, this looks really interesting, like a bit different. The trailer does a good job of selling the film as this is a powerful relationship drama film with sci-fi stuff in it. And then it came out and it was also greeted by walls of silence. Especially as it also had a run at the film festival where I wanted to see it first but missed the chance before it got released. And there was a general kind of, not because it's terrible, but I guess because it just didn't deliver on its promise and the conversation has moved on.
It's not awful. It just I don't think it quite works. I don't think it's as good as it could be.
Yeah, it's not going to break my top 5 of the year, but it's also, I doubt it'll be in the worst film of the year either.
Yeah, but I haven't actually fully computed what my worst film of the year is going to be. But it would probably be excessive for me to decide it's this. But there's still time.
I mean, it's almost impossible to make this comparison because they're two very, very different films and the fact they're nominally sci-fi films. But like, I thought Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was a worse film than this. Like, it was more of a kind of like, oh, that was a bit of a, a waste of my time seeing that. But one's like a kind of wacky Marvel film and one's a emotional drama. The only connection is they both have a sort of sci-fi, setting as the kind of structure their story is built around.
Yeah, I mean, Ant-Man and the Wasp obviously has its well-documented problems, being as it is possibly one of the most publicly criticised films of the year so far. It did at least have jokes and explosions in it, which maybe made it slightly less boring, but yeah, it was definitely a worse film all told.
Yeah, we didn't see The Flash, which is supposed to be this year's absolute honker.
Yeah, I can never quite decide what the perception is of The Flash. Is it terrible, or is it merely alright, but got Ezra Miller in it? It's hard to tell.
Yeah.
Don't know. Tune in about a month and a half. The year is nearly over for that.
Yeah. But in terms of this film, I like the fact it's breaking down, genre walls. Its lack of success might not encourage future experimentation, but if it does in some way lay the grounds for interesting films in the future that mix genres in this way and kind of do domestic relationship dramas with a hint of sci-fi, again, which is kind of what Black Mirror does quite well. So Black Mirror is definitely one of the steps on the road to this point. I mean, we haven't reached the definitive work in this space, but the exploration continues.
Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence for this fortnight. Thank you very much for listening. If you have enjoyed this podcast, you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com as ever and discover more episodes, more articles, some outtake clips from our old episodes, all sort of stuff. But if you enjoyed that, you can leave us a nice 5-star review on your podcast outlet of choice. Thank you.
You can also get more from us on social media. Search for us on Facebook by typing in Moderate Fantasy Violence and you'll see our purple logo and you can follow us there. Or you can find us on Twitter where we are at MFV Podcast. You can get more from me on Twitter, Threads and Blue Sky by searching for Alistair Ball, and you can get more of my writing at redtrainblog.com or my theatre reviews at Everything Theatre.
And you can find me at nickbryan.com on the internet or by searching Nick Bryan on many social networks. I think the ones I'm using primarily at the moment are probably Blue Sky and Instagram, but I'm all over the place. I'm also selling my comics at Fort Bubble Convention in Harrogate this coming weekend if you're in the area. Come by. If you like comics, then oh boy, there's a lot of comics. And speaking vaguely of comics, in our next episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, it'll be one of our occasional Marvel double episodes in which we cover both their new movie, The Marvels, and their latest TV series, Loki Season 2. So join us next time as we jump into the Is Marvel Still Good discourse. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye.